Can you hear me now? Yes. Well, thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon for the ERT report. We're going to be specifically looking at the Competitiveness and Industry Benchmarking Report 2024. But of course, our title for today is Rebuilding Europe's Business Case, Working Against the Clock. Today's event is being live streamed by Euractiv, so hello to everyone who's joining us online as well. And a reminder to those of us who may ask questions later on that the event is also being recorded. We talk about clockwork, wanting things to run like clockwork, but of course it's also a countdown clock that we're thinking of today when you see this motif, and about the importance of getting things done at speed. So we're going to look at today the 38 KPIs, the key performance indicators that the report has brought out, and look at Europe's competitiveness compared to other global partners, global competitors, and those who are a little bit in between as well. We're going to look at the EU single market, of course. Those of you following it know there's some small reports that are being done at EU level that we'll hear about soon. We're also going to look at technological leadership, the regulatory environment, and the, of course, twin transitions of green and digital. To give you all a warm welcome and to set the scene for today, however, I'm happy to hand over now for a few welcoming remarks to Jan Erik Sundgren, Acting Secretary General of ERT. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And warmly welcome to all of you, and good afternoon. It's a pleasure to see as many of you here today, and I hope you will enjoy the event. As in most part of the world, there is a lot of transitions going on, and so is it also at ERT. In January, the Secretary General, Frank Heemskerk, decided to leave ERT and start to work with ASML. And in the meantime, I've gotten the task to conduct and steer the ship on the way forward until a new Secretary General is found or is recruited, and that is an ongoing process. I've been with ERT in other capacities for a number of years, so I think that's why I got a phone call in December last year to do this. Obviously, there is an old expression in management: if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, or you can't get it done. And indeed, that objective is also the core of ERT's competitiveness working group activities, in the sense of the benchmarking report. And it's only by fully understanding where others are that you can compare it with where you are yourself, and thus to improve. And that's what the ERT benchmarking report is all about. It has been conducted for a number of years, actually since the 1990s, on a biannual basis. And while some of the KPIs, key performance indicators, have been the same since we started, we have, of course, expanded the number of KPIs to cope with the current world that we live in. So, of course, in today's scene here in Brussels, we are all waiting for what Professor Draghi's report will come about, to see what he thinks needs to be measured. But in the meantime, I hope we can, by the event today, by having two keynote speakers, Utti Slotbaum, Director of DG GROW, and Martin Brudermüller, who is the chairman of the Committee for Competitiveness and Innovation at ERT, and also the CEO of BSAF. So they will explain, I think, the current state of play, and then afterwards we will have a discussion in a panel that will sort of discuss these issues that are being brought up today. I think it's of utmost importance that we continue these activities and scrutinize what we are doing in order to increase the competitiveness of European industry, which is of so much importance for the wealth and for the society here in Europe, so we can make Europe a great place to live and work in. So without further ado, let me then give the word back to our moderator.
Thank you very much, Jan-Erik, and you've rather stolen my job. You've introduced our next speaker for us, who is indeed joining us from the European Commission to tell us about the annual Single Market Report, Outi Slotboom, Director General of DG GROW. Thank you, Outi.
Good afternoon, everybody. Very pleased to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and congratulations on your new benchmarking report. I saw the press release which came out this morning, which spoke about Europe having had a cold shower last year and now moving into an ice bath. And of course, the country where I come from, we are very familiar with all this, because up north, where you have a frozen lake, it is very popular free time activity to dig a hole and take a little dip in this cold water. And probably your acting Secretary General is aware of this long tradition up north. But of course, while a cold dip in ice-cold water may be refreshing, the purpose is by no means to stay in that cold water. The purpose is to run into the heat of the sauna, which is waiting just around the corner. So, but if you meant the cold water ice bath in a more figurative way, then possibly your purpose also is to spread awareness. And seeing bad results or worrying developments is something that even if it feels shocking and not energizing, we should all do. And this is exactly what your benchmarking report is doing. And this is what we do with our Single Market and Competitiveness Scoreboard, which is a web publication. We just a month ago published the latest data for 2024. Together with a policy report which goes with it, the annual Single Market and Competitiveness Report. So to give you a glimpse of where we stand with our analysis, I have two slides which show some of our key performance indicators and some others as well. So here, what you see on the screen is comparisons of where the EU stands in comparison to third countries. Private investment, we are actually not doing so badly, despite all the cold showers of the pandemic, of supply chain disruptions, energy crisis, Russian aggression in Ukraine. Private investment is still keeping up quite nicely. Where we are really lagging significantly behind is venture capital. And this is critical for the ability of small businesses, startups to scale up quickly, grow and prosper in Europe. This is where we are clearly behind. In terms of public investment, the EU is comparable to the United States and the UK. Moving more to the skills, technology development, innovation, research, you see on the bottom row how we, despite the long-standing objective of devoting 3% of GDP to research investments, we are still behind, and we are falling further behind our main competitors. You see the United States and Japan leading the market. China has pushed ahead of us. The UK is slightly behind. This is an area where for at least 15 years we have had a target. We are not really moving closer to it. And maybe even more worrying is the educational situation of young people and their educational achievements. If you look at the data for the PISA scores, which are an OECD test of 15-year-old ones in literacy, maths and sciences, the EU has fallen behind the United States, behind the UK, and China and Japan have moved very quickly ahead of us. And we are, if anything, we are falling behind. So moving from here to my second slide, this is then a traffic light chart which shows you where, looking at the last 2 years for which data are available, whether the EU as a whole is improving or falling behind, or the yellow color stable. And you see many positive developments. Our market integration is going ahead. Trade within the EU continues to increase very rapidly, and this is not at the cost of our trade with third countries. We are also trading more with the rest of the world relative to GDP, so openness increases. Private investments are increasing. In terms of the transposition of EU law, the situation improved in the last 2 years, while work is still ahead. Our green agenda, renewable energies, there we are improving. Digitalization, yes, labor market's doing relatively well, but then we have the red areas, which I already referred to. Venture capital investment, very low and declining. Research and development spending. Electricity prices for industry in this graph, they are increasing, at least when they were last measured. And again, the skills of 15-year-olds. Also, our share in the world economy and the global export markets is declining. This may be unavoidable, but there are things which can be done to support our exports. I will finish my presentation with the last slide, which is about the drivers of competitiveness as we see them. This was the framework that we presented a year ago, and this is also the framework through which we look at future policies. As the basis of sustainable competitiveness is a well-functioning single market. This is our greatest asset. This is where our competitiveness and ability to exploit economies of scale and scope and grow up comes from. We have investments, public and private, public investments also in terms of the infrastructure which companies need. Research and development, access to sustainable energy at prices which industry can tolerate, moving into a circular economy, continuing on the path of digitalization of our economies, education and skills, and then finally our trade policy instruments, creating a level playing field in the world. And of course, as part of the single market, as part of our competitiveness, the regulatory framework which is growth enhancing. The Commission has put forward many initiatives in this area, starting from the Green Deal, proposals to enhance our resilience, like the Single Market Emergency Instrument, improvements in our regulatory system, the commitment to reduce reporting burdens on businesses by 25%. And of course, we have proposed to allocate money to good EU-level investments, having a strategic platform for strategic investments at the EU level. So from this, we have to move forward, and I look forward to hearing from how you see the situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Quite informative and easy to follow, those slides that really paint quite a clear picture. As you said, we are going to hear what the latest report from ERT has to say. And to present that, we're delighted to have Dr. Martin Brudermüller, Chair of the ERT and Committee on Competitiveness and Innovation. Martin.
Yeah. Could I have a little bit more light here? in the dark. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. I think today's conversation is about building. The Empire State Building has been built in 1 year. It's a symbol of technological achievement of its time and of an area where basically the United States literally built itself out of the Great Depression and became the dominating global and economic power until today. The Great Pyramids each took roughly about 20 years to be built. And they have become a symbol for an empire at the height of its power, of perseverance and perfection, but also of how an era can change. Today's EU single market has taken 30 years to build, and 1.5 times as long as the building of the Great Pyramids. And it is still not complete. But it stands for prosperity and for peace. And now it is time to make sure that it stays that way. And this is my 3rd time that I'm launching the ERT's Competitiveness in Industry Benchmarking report, and it is also my last one. Its call is Rebuilding Europe's Business Case. You might well ask, why does Europe have to rebuild anything? We have overcome the pandemic. We have weathered the abrupt stop of the gas imports from Russia. We are driving technological progress to fight climate change, and we have never lived so well. And we feel strong to telling others in the world that the one and only right path into the future is the European one. But we are lacking sense of reality, and I think we are a bit naive when it comes to recognize and to acknowledge that Europe's competitiveness is rapidly fading. There are some brutal facts fueling this development. Populism is growing in most member states, triggered by our middle class or middle classes in Europe that are fearing a loss of prosperity and even of their livelihoods. We are all together experiencing that making the green transition is a reality is much harder than drafting the laws to trigger it, and that we still have not created the right conditions to stem this massive project that affects everyone in our society, and are realizing that Europe is not leading on many of the technologies that will shape tomorrow's world, starting with AI, which we need to embrace and own because this is the reality of tomorrow. And last not least, we experience that energy prices are much higher than those paid by our competitors and take a significant toll on industry, value chains, and the whole industrial ecosystems. In addition to that, global development is not in favor of Europe. Russia's war in Ukraine fundamentally challenges our security, but also our democracies, our values, and our standing in the world. And that our world is developing away from Western order and becoming more polarized and fragmented, and a much harder world to navigate. With that, there are many sparks that can ignite new conflicts at any time. We also had to learn that the very functioning of our economies depend on our competitive access to energy, critical raw materials, and input components, such as chips, and that this access is by no means guaranteed. And finally, that being an incumbent of global markets does not protect us from fierce competition tomorrow. So it is a shocking reality that overall we have been losing 30% of our market share in the last 20 years. There are all challenges with which Europe will have to deal with, and so to do on its own. Globally, we find ourselves in competition not only as producers, but also as a place in which to invest and operate. And our business models depend on access to markets and raw materials. In today's world, alliances with third countries are key, but who will want to invest here or seek alliances with us if we do not manage to remain globally relevant as an economic powerhouse and trading partner? Europe has been a success story because we have had a working business case. Alarmingly, that business case has started to crumble. And now Europe needs to rebuild it. Because if we do not do, we will be out of business faster than we would expect it. Personally, I'm not ready for the pyramids. Neither are the companies engaged in the ERT. And I do believe that you are either. But make no mistake, the sand is shifting between our feet right now, and time is of essence. The 2024 benchmarking report sets out how Europe should be rebuilt, the business case. It showcases with 38 KPIs and a list of concrete policy recommendations. I will not go through all of these in detail now, but just for a moment, let us look at Europe as if it was a company. If Europe was a company, it would be high time for a turnaround strategy, a strategy to rebuild and strengthen its value proposition. But what are the top 3 action points for company Europe's leadership? First, increase our focus on what we are still very good at. It is really important that so far Europe has maintained a good position as an exporter of high technology manufacturing goods. To stay strong, we have to build on Europe's technology tradition and create stronger business cases for innovation leadership, both in revolutionary horizontal technologies such as AI and quantum computing, and in other disciplines that will reshape whole sectors, such as advanced materials and bioengineering. Gaining and preserving excellence is key to maintaining Europe's human capital. Benefits of technology leadership will spread up and down the value chains to stimulate the wider industrial fabric. Second, we need to optimize the use of our most valuable asset. Our most valuable asset is the EU single market. But even after 30 years, there is a lot of room for improvement. For a meaningful improvement, we have to, finally, remove remaining barriers to internal trade at the very nitty-gritty level. This is an ungrateful work, but it needs to get done. Company Europe absolutely needs greater economies of scale in its home market to accelerate growth and underpin its global competitiveness. Third, tackle what is holding us back. First, Company Europe has accumulated an unprecedented burden of regulation and administrative demands, and it is still piling new rules on top. It has created overload of rules. Many rules that have been added in recent years underscore the new direction of travel. But to actually get there, Company Europe has to take the time and resources to digest its new regulatory reality. And it needs to take a step back to simplify its rulebook and restore the overall coherence of rules with its core policy objectives. And to make the objectives reality, replacing conservative targets with incentives will be key. Second, Company Europe has neglected its infrastructure. Without internal infrastructure, no company can deliver anything. And our peers and competitors are not waiting for us. In fact, they have already overtaken us. Our business model needs top-notch connectivity. We have to make the digital and the green transition a success for citizens and industries. And that means that we have to urgently invest more and better in fiber networks and 5G to enable our digital future. Clean and reliable, affordable energy is key to facilitate the transformation for households and industry. We need to invest more in renewables and become stronger in hydrogen. But all this will not help us much if we do not also build a strong and smart intra-connected grid infrastructure that spans our entire market and helps creating a single market for energy. I have full confidence that Company Europe can manage the U-turn and rebuild its business case. But our leadership has to come up with a coherent strategy and fast. Maybe this benchmarking report can help. Our 2022 report was meant to be a cold shower to wake us up. Since then, our challenges have become even more pressing. But I'm not sure we are fully awake yet. So we have upgraded the 2004 report for an ice bath, and Auti, I am happy that obviously the language we have chosen created the awareness we have intended. On a personal note, my term at BASF comes to an end in April. I can't even be blunder, and I may have been in the past. I'm deeply concerned about the shape of our continent and its standing in the world. And I fear that our political leadership has not yet accepted how urgently we need to rebuild Europe's business case. I place very high hopes in the upcoming report of Mario Draghi, and I have very strong confidence in Europe's ability to take the necessary steps to restore its competitiveness. But I'm very concerned that the political instinct in Brussels and in most capitals still is to achieve change by prescriptive regulation. And this will not work, because the challenges we are facing are too big to be resolved by just throwing money and legislation at the problem. That said, we do need a miracle. The very real magic of the invisible hand is more than enough. But to let the invisible hand to do its magic, we need supportive and pragmatic partnerships. We need a new industrial EU deal. Also, to preserve our social values and make the green transition a success story for everyone. And making Europe a success story again is the only way in which we can show EU citizens and the world at large that democracies remain strong and superior in any global competition of political systems. To achieve this, it is worth taking an ice bath. After summer, with the next European leadership in place and ready for business, we will have to get to work. We have to rebuild our business case and complete the single market. We may not manage to do that in 1 year like the builders of the Empire State Building, but we will have to be well awake and we will be working against the clock. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. As you say, maybe not all achievable in 1 year, given the scale of the efforts to go ahead. But thank you very much for setting that out for us. I will call you, and Auti, please rejoin me on stage as we move into our panel discussion. Auti, grab a seat, and Martin as well. Do come and join me. We'd also like to be joined by Klaes Michael Staal, Deputy Secretary General of the European Trade Union Council, ETUC. So grab a seat, sir. Joining us also for our discussion, we have Tom Anderson, Principal Economic Advisor from the European Investment Bank. Thank you very much, Tom. We also have Rebecca Christie, who is a Senior Fellow at Bruegel and Europe Thomson Reuters columnist. And finally, Diego Pavia, CEO of EIT InnoEnergy. Thank you all very much for joining us. I'm sure people are delighted to see what an experienced panel we have. I've got a set of questions, and we will then turn around to questions from the floor and really try and dig into what we have to look forward to, or what we have to, actually work at with regard to these reports. So let me start, Rebecca, let me start with you. So based on your perspective, we've heard from our keynote speakers, what should Europe do to rebuild its business case and preserve global competitiveness? It's a big question. Set the scene for us.
Thank you so much for asking, and for all of you for coming, and to ERT for organizing this event. Europe, high concept, big picture, needs to, am I not turned on? Bing. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Woo! Growth. Europe needs to look for growth as a goal in and of itself, not as a byproduct of doing something, not as a byproduct of a strategy or a second order consequence, but as a thing that helps, that in and of itself creates other things. I realize all of you are sitting here, well, of course we want to grow. How else does the economy get going? But when you look at the different policy initiatives that are coming out, people often talk, they say, oh, we want competitiveness. And to do that, we need to maybe protect European industry from what's happening elsewhere in the world. Or we need to create certainty through regulation that will make people want to do business in Europe. We need to find ways to mobilize investment. But all of that goes around this idea that Europe is going to be bigger and stronger and more exciting in some ways than it has already been able to accomplish going forward. Looking at the KPIs that we see in the benchmark report, there was one that really struck me because it talks about the single market. This is the one on page 27 of your report. And it says, we need to reduce EU and national silo thinking. We need scale-up potential for innovation. It doesn't mention Capital Markets Union. I know Capital Markets Union is old and it's boring, but it's also how the US finances so much of its innovation. It's also a public good in and of itself to have an alternative to bank financing that helps people connect with investors who are interested in doing all this. I was asked a little bit to speak about artificial intelligence, and I can tie that into what I was just talking about by saying that for Europe to catch up on AI, for Europe to proceed, it needs to partner with some of the transatlantic firms that are already doing this. Europe can't grow in an EU bubble by itself. It can't find the cloud computing, it can't make the connections it needs, but through making partnerships with firms that already have the infrastructure, that have the computing capacity and the power, it can find ways to develop the great, the base of innovation, the education, the inspiration, the very early stage research. We see now with the AI Act that the EU's idea of how to become a leader is to set guardrails and safeguards, and that this will improve consumer confidence in AI, and where consumers are confident, this will create a market. Also, for that to work, there has to be something created, because if EU consumers are stuck only buying things that are innovated elsewhere and bought elsewhere, all of the guardrails will just be working with something that comes from the outside. So these investments we see with Microsoft, with Google, that are looking to build on EU startups and form partnerships, this isn't a threat to the EU regulation. I would argue this is a way to strengthen the interconnections that will make more growth possible going forward. So with that to set the scene, look forward to hearing the rest of the panelists and the further discussion.
Okay, and thank you, delving straight into the AI topic already. I'm sure we'll come back around to it. Klaus Michael, let me ask you for the same question, your opening thoughts, your perspectives on what Europe needs to do in a general sense.
Thank you. And first of all, can I be heard? Yes, good. So I'm from the Trade Union Confederation here in Brussels. So I have slightly different outlooks on things, I would guess, than most of you here. But at the same time, I would say that from a trade union perspective, we also support much of what's in the report. It's rather how you put down your weight on things. So competitiveness from our perspective would also be focusing a lot on what surrounds and what makes growth possible. And of course, it's difficult to talk about growth. We are talking about childcare, healthcare, schools, public services, transports, workers, and the trade unions, and wages and training, and all that embeddedness is important as well. So it's a bit like in a kung fu movie. You have these strings coming down, and you think that people can fly, but actually there's a lot of strings that make flying look so easy for these kung fu masters. So it's easy to forget about these strings that makes competitiveness possible on European scale. And I think that Jacques Delors, the late president of the Commission, understood this and brought this very much to the European agenda, and we hope to continue that path, of course, to find a balance between an efficient market economy and social distribution, social fairness, and all of that. And I think that's very important. So that's something to mention already at this stage. I will not go into the confrontative things yet. I will come to that. Burdens, as Martin here mentioned in the beginning. I think we can frame it in different ways, but we save that boxing to a little bit later, I think. But yeah, so if we want to have competitiveness, I think we can contribute also from the trade union side, but I think it's also important that the business side contributes, and because civilization has a price, and it comes by things that we don't like that much, maybe taxes, redistribution, rules, and can be perceived as burdens, as I said. I'll come back to a lot of things later on. This is a start. Let's get started.
Okay. We'll look forward to the Kung Fu.
Yes.
Diego, same sort of question, opening remarks, give us your thoughts. I mean, Europe needs to, we're saying rebuild here. I mean, is that even the right emphasis? Should it be build?
Yeah. So just a few, hello? 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 Anyway, my voice is strong enough.
Yeah.
So a few words on Who is Energy, so you understand my pitch afterwards, and messages, and then my messages. So in Energy, we are an early-stage investor in clean tech. We have been doing that for 13 years. We have deployed, together with our parties, investors, 25 billion euros in Europe for the last 13 years, and between now and 2030 is 160 billion euros. So if this money is there, already in the past deployed, and to be deployed, is because already today there are some cases that just underpin that, at least in that size, it is possible. Names like Northvolt, H. Green Steel, Verkor might resonate on you. And then to your question, two messages. Number one is, I think that we all agree that the landing scenario for all of us, the long-term competitiveness of Europe, cannot be done just on price. We have decided as an economy that is going to be on three other parameters. It's going to be on sustainability, that everything that we consume or we trade has got the lowest CO2 footprint possible. That is as much recycled content in the product or good as much as possible. And that is traceable. There's no labor child workforce and so on. So this is the long term. But meanwhile, in the transition, we're suffering. As Martin is saying, we're suffering big time, and especially the traditional players. So for me, my two key messages is, let's stick to our guns as far as the long-term scenario is, and that our long-term competitiveness is not based only on price, but on the other three criteria I just mentioned, because that's the DNA of Europe. That's what makes us different. That will make our world better for the next generations. And then let's solve the transition, because the transition is going to be more costly. We're seeing this. A lot of companies are suffering, and we need to help them. And to help them is also to help us, because those companies have got jobs in Europe, and jobs is people that are able to buy our products and services, and we are able to keep on exporting and growing. So let's help the today incumbents to make the transition. And that's only an economic help. And last message, if you look at the GDP of the three big economies, US, Europe, and China, in 2010, Lehman Brothers, US and Europe were the same size of economy, the same size. Since 2010, we have not just a single euro in our GDP. In 13 years, whereas the US has skyrocketed. And meanwhile, also China has skyrocketed. So in 13 years, we have not put a penny in our GDP as far as Europe is concerned.
And Tom, then finally, we come to you for your opening thoughts on the overall state of play, and whether or not, if you want to say at this point, you agree with your fellow panelists.
Yeah, you hear me, yes. Yes, thank you very much. Obviously, I'm coming from the EIB side, where I've been working for many years, so that's kind of my relevant experience. And I want to say I've heard a lot of relevant thoughts here. I actually agree with everybody now. And it's very easy to say, but I will try to explain a little bit. I mean, obviously, coming from the EIB, we are financing some 88 billion euros of projects in a year, including the EIF. It's quite a lot. Of course, it's nothing compared to the actual needs, but it's a lot. We are EU's policy-driven bank, right? So we work close together with the European Commission, and we are owned by the EU27. We are also EU's climate bank. So we have all the focuses which were just mentioned, actually. And of course, we are actually a very large bank, right, per all standards. And as I mentioned, it's still not enough, right? So we also have our internal, let's say, investment barrier reports. We actually published that last month from 2023, covering 2023. And we also identified several barriers, of course, based on interviews with our clients. We have quite a few. We've done some 14,000 projects, right, since our inception in 1958, which is a lot compared to, I think, most, and both small and big. One can calculate around I think per project would be an average size of 100 million euros, so it's also not so small. And one of the things which was identified was, of course, the regulatory complexity, right, within the EU, the bureaucratic hurdles, and differing national policies, which blocking what we heard before, the economies of scale, right, obviously. This is extremely important. We come back to this very basic point, but if you want to make money, you need scale. And somebody has to pay for innovation. So, and a key driver of competitiveness is, of course, innovation. We all know that. And we are very good at that at the EU. We are a global research powerhouse in many ways. We shouldn't forget that. And a leading economy in terms of investments in R&D and number of researchers. But still, we are lagging behind, of course, compared to, for example, US and China, both in terms of the actual R&D, as we just saw, we perform or let's say, perform in the EU, but also in terms of the results. So let's say if we have fewer new companies considering world leading, fewer world top universities, or semiconductor manufacturing capacity, we also have less of that. So there is a certain effect to the fact that we spend less than we should. And we should be at the 3% at least. We're still not there. But it's actually worse than that, because there's a scientific or technological divide within the EU, which we shouldn't forget. We didn't go into those details, but I think it's important. So we need to invest more and smarter in R&D, because, of course, the single market is really the most important thing, I would say, from my personal point of view. We have let's say, creative within the EU, and we need to support it by a lot more R&D and innovation, but it has to be in all countries, right? Otherwise, we get this screwed thing where also in terms of cultural impact, we can imagine where there could be a little bit problematic to agree on different policies, right? What I want to say is we've done some 300 billion euros in innovation at the EIB. We supported that since 2000. I think it's really quite important. And what I particularly want to say is that EIB, in that sense, is very unique because it's a powerful multiplier. You could even say a catalyst of investments, because the member states are paid in money, but the money is coming back. So they're in principle being reused, right? Every year we can reuse the money. It's not spent, it's not grants. So, and I think it's very much the non-distortive, let's say, impact of EIB financing is very much appreciated with our clients within the EU in particular. Of course, the digital, which was mentioned, and green transformation is on the top of our agenda, and it's difficult these days with the tightening fiscal space. I also want to just make that point. So we do require additional effective and targeted incentives and catalytic public investments. And for that, of course, we work close together with the European Commission, because there we do need to take more risk. And for a bank like the EIB, if you will, public bank, AAA rated, for us to keep our rating, we do need, when we take risk and support startups, which we are doing more and more, in fact, a lot more. Since the last 15 years, our volume has increased by 65%, and it's mainly within the high-risk investments, in fact. And that is very much supported by mandates of the EU, which is very important. So that means we can support startups, and we are doing that in, of course, clean tech, in public good fields, I would say, right? So climate action, but also it could also be within biotech, right? Early stage, but because it becomes pre-competitive. When it becomes pre-competitive, you can justify even to support profit-maximizing companies because it's so far upstream and the risk of failure is so great, right? And as we know, R&D, let's say we are not doing enough. We are underinvesting in R&D, as we just discussed. One more point, quickly. The EIF, through the EIF, of course, we have, and which we are very proud of, the last 15 years, we supported around half of the unicorns within the EU, which is very important. I think it's a very important point. So that means the ones you heard about, Skype, Skyscanner, Spotify, Shazam, Zalando, WeTransfer. It's very important. So we do something here. Again, we're not doing enough, but the fundament is there. And that is based on also the risk-sharing model. Because risk, we are not willing to take enough risk, right? Then we come back to the skills as another issue. Without skills, we cannot have the innovation we need. So that is something we need to. We need to move you can say we need to put innovation higher on the priority list in education and skill policies. We do support all sectors, of course. It's not just the private sector, it's also public goods, infrastructure, and mobility and so on. Then I think one thing we probably have ignored a little bit is also supporting the larger companies because we do need this upscaling ability for the smaller companies. It's not all of them who will become unicorns. Of course, and it's not all who want to, of the entrepreneurs. They should be able to also license out or sell their products. And for that, you do need somebody who can develop it further and distribute and marketing it. So, okay, I'll stop there. I just want to say that it was a long story, but I think I could keep on talking, obviously, about this. But I think the partnership with the European Commission has evolved a lot the last years, and we really have, and this is something we need to build further on. I think we need to do a lot more. It's proven to be very successful in terms of bringing forward very risky startups, and in fact, on balance, they do succeed on the portfolio level. So I think this is very important. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Tom. And of course, not every company can be a unicorn. I think that's also worth bearing in mind that a lot of the EU backbone is SMEs as well. Oti and Martin, I want you to, we've heard your opening remarks on the podium, but Oti, tell me, what is your original, your initial response to what you've heard from the other panelists? What would you like to pick up on?
Yeah, I would like to say that I agree with everybody, but that's too boring. So maybe if I try to go a bit into the Kung Fu style and pick two areas where at least I could maybe take a slightly different angle. And the first one is on the need for policies for growth and competitiveness, as Rebecca said. And that is absolutely true, and they are needed. But very often, the biggest competitiveness impact of policies comes from policies which are targeting something completely different. And for me, probably the most important thing is to make sure that policies don't work in silos, so that you have one area of growth policies and then you have policies which work towards other very important targets, but then these basically all offset each other. And that makes our world much more complicated. We have, and you maybe saw it on my last slide, we have a definition of competitiveness, which is productivity, economic efficiency, but it is also environmental sustainability, it is social values, and it is resilience. And looking at all these and trying to make policies in the EU which are not only good policies to support companies, but where we have policies for environment or social policies, that we also apply a competitiveness check when these policies are prepared. I wanted to make that point because this is possibly the most challenging part in any policy making, that you don't offset other things by trying to do good in one area. The other thing which I wanted to stop for a little while was what Martin said on it's not enough to throw money or regulation if there's a problem. And I'm not sure what exactly you meant, but for policy makers, the two main instruments are money and regulation. So if you have a problem, if there's not enough innovation, you can try to solve it by investing in research projects or training of researchers. You can try to spend money on education, or you can try to change the regulation which is in place so that it doesn't impose a technological structure. You can try to have regulation which involves sandboxing and openness to allow companies to innovate and experiment with different solutions. So these are basically the two things that if you asked me to deal with a problem, I would say it's either or both, and we don't have much more. And of course, at the EU level, we don't have much of a budget, but we are a regulatory superpower. And we have very often replaced 27 competing regulations by one single market rule, which helps companies scale up. So these would be my two, not really kung fu, but I wanted to raise a bit of a discussion.
Well, perhaps it's obvious, Michael, to turn to you and get you to expand a bit on what you mean by that. As Outi is saying, you can only work with the tools at your disposal, and in the Commission those are very clearly limited to regulatory, well, as you say, primarily regulatory, and then a bit of funding. So what more is it that you see as the missing link?
Well, I mean, first of all, let me start with, I'm an incredible optimist. So if I listen to the different perspectives that people have, then I would say we all agree that we could do better. And I mean, as we praise the democracies, and democracies, solutions in democracies are compromises. And the best compromise and the best solutions are the ones with the biggest common denominator. And I would say we have a pretty good common denominator. As a father of kids, and I think many in the room agree, if you have a highly intelligent kid that is lazy in school, it drives you nuts as a father and parents. And I have a little bit the feeling that is how we do in Europe. We are just below our means and opportunities. It drives me nuts if I see how rich Europe is with all what we have, but we don't get the ducks in a row. This is driving me really nuts. And I think this is a bit the case. We overdo it with rules and with defining everything in the last details. We need to leave room and space for interpretation. And there I also would like to link in when I said it's not only money and regulation. I'm deeply convinced that in today's time, which has become a little bit the public sport of every interest group, if something is not right, you ask the state for money. We cannot fix all the problems with tax money. So I think we need also the room that we have generate framework that the people who are good, who are creative, who are entrepreneurial, are successful in Europe. That is what we need. You mentioned the sandboxes as well. I think we are innovative in a lot of things, but we are not innovative at all in regulations. And I think regulations have also to be innovative. And this is something where I would ask that regulators have to listen. That's why I think sandboxes are important. You should listen to industry what you actually need to be successful and not to do the regulation on yourself. There's a lot of academic and intellectual people in the machinery, but listen to what we really need to be successful. And I think transformation is the fastest if industry can earn money with transformation. So I would say this is a basic principle. Ask the guys, I said, what do you need to implement that stuff and earn money? Then the growth comes, then the employment comes, then the success comes, then the investment comes. And so I think it is not only in writing everything down what the rule sets is, it's not only about public money, because I think we have to put our own money at risk. That's actually what entrepreneurs do. And sometimes they fail if they are not intelligent enough or too bold or whatever. That's also normal. So I think we have to come a little bit back to these old traits where it is not about saving one industry and one interest group and this particular interest. It is really about setting a framework where the natural choice in the world, where you want to go to, is Europe. Because I think we all agree, in my eyes, the best place to live, the most diverse, the most exciting place to live. So let's make it also the best place to do business. And this is why we asked for that business case to really get the framework conditions that all this is going to happen. And I think a lot of the stuff we write down is awfully intelligent and academic and, let me say, also partially irrelevant and not pragmatic. And this is why I think we have to really write that stuff totally different. And that's why I think we also can achieve it only together. But looking at the different aspects here, it makes me pretty optimistic.
Klaus Michael, let me bring you in. I mean, we can't tear up the rule book entirely. We need guardrails of some sorts, do we not?
Yes.
Let's have the kung fu kicks now, please.
Yes. So first I want to say, Diego, thank you for being here, because I'm not the only trade unionist here, obviously, because you say the long-term goal cannot be only price. And I think that's a very good starting point for this discussion, because there will always be countries, places, companies out there that will compete with lower wages, lower social conditions, lower sustainability of green and all of that. So if you go out and compete in that world, of course, I guess Somalia would be the best place to be, because there are no rules whatsoever. That's your dream, I guess.
No, it's not much.
I know. Here comes Kung Fu. No, so the question then, and this is why I urge all of the business community and also you, Martin, is to get a little bit more nuanced and fine-tuned when it comes to these rules agenda. Because when you say things like you overdo rules, you're throwing rules and money, you bring out the nuances that is needed here. Because we don't want rules because of having rules. We want good rules. We want better rules. We want rules that are efficient as to what they're about to achieve. I think there we have a lot of common ground to cover, and I would be very happy to have that kind of conversation. And just as Ute says, it's actually where we compete very well. It's doing good rules, and what the European Commission can do is good rules. So let us work jointly there to increase our competitiveness by making better rules. So that's where I think there is an area of peace in that regard. Let me also say something I forgot to say, and that is, of course, where we see issues where we would like to strengthen our competitiveness in Europe as well. And one is to close the investment gap. Investment in energy and transport and infrastructure. I think these are the things that you would agree to. I think we need to mobilize public investment, and we are quite worried actually about the development we see now, that the self-inflicted fiscal consolidation that's ongoing. It's certainly not going to help our competitiveness in the long run. Second area where we see a need is to a case for strengthening our competitiveness is actually in social cohesion. We have discussed an awful lot the last couple of years the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, but there is a lot we can learn from that too. I mean, and that's the social conditionalities that came in the package that was brought forward there. But I would like to turn around. I think there is an awful lot that the Americans can learn from us. And it's the European social model, quality jobs, strong social protection, public services, social dialogue. The fact that we have trade unions here at the scene is something that it's a sign of strength. And finally, social conditionalities, but we can come back to that too. I think that's the big issue coming into the future.
Well, I did. My next question actually to Rebecca was going to be on the impact of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. Yeah. It does come with a lots of pockets of money in terms of how it's raised is variable and different from the EU approach. But it also comes with this Made in America tag, which smacks of protectionism, which causes us headaches. What's your overall view on it, Rebecca? What should we learn from it, as Klaus Michael is saying?
The Inflation Reduction Act is a wonder, really, because it got past it all. U.S. Congress is so dysfunctional right now that the idea that it could put together a major piece of, at its heart, environmental legislation is something to be grateful for. And for all that I personally, as an immigrant, as a border crosser and a free trader, don't like some of the more protectionist aspects of it, I am very impressed that Congress got it through it all, and I guess that makes me more tolerant of some of these trade barriers. On an economic level, a lot of the IRA subsidies are done through tax breaks, which is you do the thing first and then you get a credit for doing it. And that is a different approach than the European method of deciding what you're going to do and funding that specific thing. Both ways have merit, both ways produce things and get you to outcomes, but the open season tax break model has the advantage of inviting all comers to try. You only have to pay to the people who actually succeed. And it's a way to broaden the market of people who are doing this. If I can just take a minute to respond to some of the excellent comments that we heard go by. Klaus, Michael, you are right that the US should learn from the EU, specifically in the area of healthcare. The EU's single-payer healthcare systems that we all take for granted and enjoy doing so would help the US economy so much. If the population were healthier and could go to the doctor for preventative care and not just go to the ER when they can't take it anymore, it would lay the foundation for so much other growth and prosperity in the US, and I hope that's something that in future administrations they come around to. Looking at the EU, I would make one specific comment and one broad comment. The specific comment is that a lot of these benchmarks look specifically at high-tech manufacturing, not at high-tech services, not at digital-only sorts of less tangible companies, but really making very fancy machines that themselves are used often to make other fancy machines. That's a great specialty. That's a great thing to be good at, but it's not single-handedly going to power a whole economy. On the very big picture, just because Dr. Bruder-Miller brought it up, the number one thing that we could all of us help do as a society, and by that I mean pretty much the entire Western world, the EU, the UK, the US, is we could try to educate men and boys to take more ownership in the success of all adult members of their households. This means that men need to do more at home so that their partners can do more at work. This is something that's very nice. We say, oh, we believe in parity, we believe in equality of opportunity, but then you have this thing of who's doing the schedule at home. I made this point. I was on a panel with with MasterCard and two members of the European Parliament, and we were talking about ways to get women in the workforce. And I brought this up and I said, look, until men believe that the economic success of their household rests on them personally taking ownership for what happens at home, we're not going to get there. And this very accomplished woman next to me who runs a fund and is very accomplished in male-dominated workforce, she said, oh, I sat down with my husband and I told him what all he needs to do and I convinced him he needs to do more. And many of us were sitting here going, well, I'm glad, I hope that worked for you. But she planned it, she took ownership of it, she told him what he had to do, and all he had to do was say yay or nay to the specific tasks. That model is not going to work. If we want women to be able to achieve the same kinds of potential that men take for granted, men have to take on this executive functioning. Men have to decide what needs to be done on their own and then ask their partner to help do it instead of just assuming that the woman will either do it, outsource it, or tell the man exactly what he needs to do. Really, if you can all take one message home, give it to yourselves, to your male children. I see some of you falling asleep. Don't fall asleep at this part. Fall asleep somewhere else, because this is a thing that could help productivity so much, beyond any of these other things.
Thank you very much. That was a very Barbie moment, Rebecca. I thoroughly applaud it wholeheartedly. Yes, Claire.
No, thank you very much, because I'm from Sweden originally. I grew up in a culture much colored by what you just described, and I've been living in different countries, and I never fully understood why it's not a natural thing that you have much more of this. Thank you for bringing this up. Thank you on behalf of the European Trade Union Movement. Very important, very important.
thank you. Indeed, it's a bit of a segue, though, to come back to the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. But Tom, I'm going to ask you to do that. Bring me back around to your perspective on the IRA. And then Diego, I'm going to want to hear from you as well.
Yes, so of course, yep. So, well, I was thinking a lot about the strategic autonomy, in fact, which of course is very important for all of us, and we need to do a lot more. I went to some events for critical raw materials, different places, South America and so on, and they look very much towards the US rather than look towards the EU, which is a little bit of an issue, right? Because we do need to ensure that we get the raw materials. So we do not offer the same incentives, I mean, we have an alternative, of course, but I think we are in a real conundrum with the massive Chinese subsidies and the let's say the protectionist US, obviously, as we do need to do something separate, something different. And I mean, coming from with my background, that I would still say, taking into account the EU, and I've been working in some of the very efficient companies in the north, and now Europe's most valuable company. Now I work at the EIB. It's really different how things are working in different countries. It's really very different. And we come back to this thing. We do need institutions such as the EIB to bridge I would say, the very efficient in some cases, or very, I don't know what you call it, maybe too efficient in some ways, cultures, and I felt, and that's why I also left at the time. But if you then go to certain other places, you have a broader view, and you think of all the other things. And I think EIB is bridging this public-private sector sphere a little bit, and that could be an alternative, which might be something which is palatable to the different member states, because that's what we come back to here in the end. We are 27 member states. And we do need to agree, otherwise, and we know that's part of one of my main points here, which I think we have to do better. As I mentioned, also we need to further the integration, obviously, of the single market and minimize the bureaucracy. And it's not easy; it's easier said than done. But I think over time it will happen. The question is whether we have the time. That's yeah.
Right. Martin, you wanted to jump in.
Quickly on this IRA, because I think it is a good example how different approaches can be by culture and by region. I mean, the IRA is also not perfect, and maybe the good thing at the beginning, if you are late, your investment cost goes through the roof, and this is now what's happening with a lot. And that will, nevertheless, you have tax incentives with high investment cost. You will have another case, and the one or the other project that is on the list will not materialize and might come back to Europe. So, which is the good news for Europe. But I think the philosophical piece is the important one. Europe takes tax monies and subsidizes CapEx, and the US is subsidizing OpEx. And you have to invest your own money, but they help you to earn money with your invested money in a case that is transformation. And let's take the example of CCS, which we have a big discussion in Europe whether we want it or not. You get $85,000 per ton of CO2, which you sequestrate, and you have a business case. It makes sense. You earn money with it. That's what I earlier said. And this is, on the other hand, you are entrepreneur. You have to take your own risk, but you get then, let's say, the help with the business case. If we take the example in Europe, we are dogmatic. Hydrogen economy has to be green. In my eyes, stupid. Start away from the colors. Make hydrogen whatever color it has. Build up an economy, and at a later stage you say, I make life now more difficult for gray than I make for blue and for green. So you can have 90% subsidies for building a hydrolyzer, but you know exactly I lose money with every ton I produce. But it's no risk. I take the money from the taxpayers and build it. Maybe a miracle happens and I produce hydrogen and somehow earn money. So it's the wrong approach. It's wasting tax money. And the last thing I want to say, and this is what most people with the IRA have not understood. If you want to sequestrate 1 million tons of CO2, you actually produce another 300,000 tons because it's a hell energy intensive process. That means you have to sequestrate later 1.3 million tons. So the IRA is nothing else than a growth program for the oil and gas industry in the US. They will produce more gas and more oil ever than before. That's where the state earns the taxes. They give back to the entrepreneurs who do the transformation. I would just call it very smart. And I would love to have something from the thinking, from the mentality in Europe, that we leave entrepreneurial risk, but then we help with business cases in the transformation, which you normally would not do because you cannot earn money. You actually help to facilitate and to start and to kickstart the transformation. And I think this example serves in the best way to show how different the approach can be. And this is what I say again, it's not only about throwing money and regulation on it, it is about the way how you think and how smart you are to facilitate something.
So I will bring Diego back in because I know you wanted to jump in and we haven't heard from you for a while. And I want to pick up on this idea of what, it's not just about competitiveness. There is an agenda there with a greening of energy that has to be addressed as well. So Diego, your thoughts?
Yeah, so a couple of messages on the IRA, piggybacking on Martin. The IRA is a cash flow solution where the federal government say, oh, I don't have industries. If I bring industries with a promise they will get a tax rebate on production, PTC or in investment, then I know that I will be collecting afterwards income tax and CIT to pay for the party. So it's basically a purely cash flow solution. What has been extremely good is, because we're afraid when Congress voted for it in the summer, is that we have reacted, and the Net Zero Industrial Act, for me, is extremely good news. For the first time ever, we Europeans have said, hey, 40% of our supply, our demand, is going to be supplied by domestic production. And that's the first in 30 years. Second, you look at the Hydrogen Bank, that's an OPEC support. Is 0.8 plus 2.2 billion for doing the right, I don't know which color of the Hydrogen Bank the hydrogen is. If you look at the OPEC support for the delay of the rules of origin for the car manufacturers in Europe, for the UK market, that's also a kind of an OPEC support. So I think that the IRA, as far as we Europeans are concerned, has been a kick in the ass, and we have reacted in almost no time, which is good. We have to push the pedal, definitely, but it goes on the right direction. That's number one. Then, is the IRA a fully fledged, well thought through? I doubt it. I mean, we as Europeans, we have voted, and it's in law, enshrined in law, the climate law. All the other economies, except Canada and Australia, is pledges. I think that they will be turning the corner if in November something happens that nobody here likes. So I will take that not as a strategic economic decision. I will take that purely as, hey, I want to win the red states towards my dear blue states. And that's it. So they cannot turn. But we have reacted structurally, which is good. And my final message is to give a bit of color to what I said in my opening speech. My freedom to operate, my agility, is that I start big industrial objects, 25 billion, 160 billion, because I've got no backpack. The marches of the world, they have a backpack, because they have a structure, they have today's sites all over the place. And we need help. We needed to help them to transform themselves. And this is, I don't know whether the interest they have to pay to the EIB will have half or 2 points less, but without helping them with all the measures that are affecting their P&L and their bill of materials, they will not transform. They might go somewhere else, and this is a short-term pain, but if they transform, we should definitely help them.
Outi, you also had comments to make. Becca.
Thanks. On incentives, giving incentives to, now I think it's me who's muted. I don't know what I've done. But maybe I pressed on the wrong button.
Perhaps, Rebecca, let's come to you while we're getting this sorted out.
Thank you so
Yep.
much. There were 3 points that I wanted to make hearing what went by. The first on energy particularly, certainly high energy prices for businesses is a constant that we hear in terms of how can EU companies become more competitive, how can they work more. Looking at transitional sources of energy and making very clear policy decisions will have a big impact. You know, are you funding hydrogen and nuclear because you think you're going to be using them in 30 years, or because you think you're going to use them as a bridge until renewables are more reliable, battery storage is there, you know, having round-the-clock power. And
there are trade-offs. You know, if you invest in a technology that you hope is going to be obsolete in 20 years, you might make different choices than if you're investing in something for the long term. The second comment I want to make is it's not just a Barbie issue, right? We can't have Barbie out doing everything while Ken's reading books on the patriarchy and then we all go home. This is an economic issue. It's a workforce issue. Women in the workforce is not a pipeline problem, it's an infrastructure problem. And I can drown you in data on this. There's numbers why it makes economic sense for all of us to care about this. The third thing I want to say is about the EIB. The EIB has a huge role to play as Europe's development bank. It is capable of taking on much more risk than it is doing without jeopardizing the credit rating. The EIF is a great thing. It's one of my favorite parts of the EIB. It's a very small part of it because of the discomfort with taking equity stakes and the discomfort with a lack of a sure return. Given how few EIB loans don't come back in, and given how large the EIB's capital base is, it can afford to take first loss guarantees, make equity investments, and do a lot of things, particularly in cross-border infrastructure projects that are risky. When you cross borders, when you have to link up separate grids, it is risky, but it can be done, and this is specifically what the EIB should be doing more of. Tom will tell you that it already is. He'll give you a list of projects. I will simply say that there's another layer of risk that's available without losing the AAA.
Audi, I think now we can.
I give it another try. So. Oh, thank you very much. On incentives, of course, as I said, we have our policy instruments and they have to work towards our goals. So if companies get the right incentives to create growth and jobs, at the same time the incentives should also be right, as you said, to transform. I think, Martin, you said that if it's profitable to transform, the industry companies will do it. So we are talking about the right incentives, but in every area. On the IRA, I wanted to make two comments and compare a bit what the US is doing to what we are doing in Europe. The United States is subsidizing, there's public money, tax credits. If you look across the EU member states and the EU itself, there are also subsidies and tax credits, but our landscape is very fragmented. If a company from outside the EU wants to invest in Europe, it is much more difficult to find out what is available, where the incentives are, and how to put together the image of the EU as a whole. And secondly, we are much slower in permitting investments. We have processes in place for very good reasons to look at environmental, social permits, conditionalities, but these tend to take very long. And what we hear from companies is that if you want to invest under the Inflation Reduction Act, you get the permissions much faster. And this clearly does give a competitive advantage to the United States, which we don't have.
Can I step up the heat a little bit on the Net Zero Industry Act? If we are not careful, it will be very soon a Zero Industry Act, and we lose the N. Why? Because this is a good example for what Europe does. We were panicking with the IRA, and then we write a paper that is 250 pages. I tried to read that on the weekend and give my team on Monday a summary of what they need to do. It's impossible. It's so awfully complicated again. Well, you have a 45-paragraph page. On one page, you give it to your CapEx team. They calculate an NPV in 20 minutes, and you need the weekend to read the Net Zero Industry Act, and you don't have anything. And it is another attempt of Europe. It sets the targets, where to decarbonize. It sets the target per sector. It even tells you which technology is eligible and which not. So it's a typical thing that politics knows everything better. And this is a good example how it should not be. I think we have to really come to the grips that we sit together. I think it's very clear we can only solve it together. Industry cannot solve it alone. Politics cannot solve it alone. But we have to make things simply less complicated. Everything is complicated here. And I think we have to make that as easy as possible, to leave also creativity to fill it. And in that respect, I really would like to make a pledge again. And you know that we have launched just a couple of weeks ago this Antwerp Declaration in the EU industrial deal, which I'm very happy that Prime Minister De Croo takes this as the headline of his EU presidency, and which started on a very narrow basis, and now it is signed by more than 700 people in 20 sectors of the energy-intensive industries. And it's not meant that this is now exactly the 10 points the industry has to do, but it is actually the pledge that the next EU Commission has to put the industry at the very top of its priority. And that does not mean, and I repeat that because I said that very often, that industry is not fine with the Green Deal. We have actually, as chemical industry, never said the what of the Green Deal is wrong. As a father of 4 children, I would like my children to live over there. But we have to argue and to discuss about the how. And this is also our discussion around how we actually do it. And I really hope that this is a new effort where we listen to each other, that politics is deregulating, taking off regulations we have which do not do the job, reformulate them, make them more simple, make them more easy, some take them off of the table totally, and that you generate politics in Brussels, in the national governments, generate a framework where simply industry can strive to have success again. Then we have employment, we fight for higher salaries and lower salaries because that's then the healthy thing. Industry can then also pay for it if it earns money. So I think we solve a lot of the formula where the deficiencies in Europe are. So I really hope that we have this initiative from the Antwerp Declaration taking off, and that this is kind of turning point that industry plays a more important role in the European politics.
Anyone else on the panel want to react specifically to that before we park the green transition and energy for a little bit? Because I've got lots to talk about with regards to the digital transition. We've got questions on quantum, on AI, and on things like supply chains for semiconductors. First of all, I'm going to get a sense of who in the room might have questions for our panelists. I know we have microphones. We've got one here at the back. Anyone else? Okay, let's take, and another couple over here. So let's take the question moving from the back of the room forwards. And then we will circle around to talking about digital as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Tilman Kupfer from Cobra Consult. Mr. Brudermüller, you talked about the 30 years it took to build up the single market until where we are now, and it's still not ready yet. For me, it's also a felt 20 years that we talk about the fact that a lot of innovation is coming out of Europe, but then when the startups want to bring them up to the market, there's no capital. And we saw also the slide of Uti, which showed where the venture capital is, not in Europe, but in US and elsewhere. And Rebecca also pointed to the fact that in the ERT benchmark report, the capital market union was not mentioned. So I wonder what's holding Europe back to build up a venture capital markets union or capital market union in general. Thank you.
Rebecca, I think, do you want to tackle that? I know you raised the issue.
Capital Markets Union. What does this mean? It means having a pool of investment opportunities for people who have money to get it to people who need money. Right now in Europe, we have something like 40 exchanges, securities, depositories, and repositories in different places. In the US, the total number of these keystone financial infrastructure institutions is more like 10. The US has so much money available, even with all the due diligence and things, that European companies go there to get their money rather than expecting the money to come to Europe. Capital Markets Union, as a slogan, is a way to create conditions to break down these barriers to help people scale up and get the money back in. Where we are right now is trying to narrow it down from the grand wish list. The grand wish list includes changing the tax treatment of equity and debt so that equity is more attractive. It includes fixing insolvency laws, because if you can't go after your collateral, you don't want to make a cross-border loan. It involves pensions, but pensions, again, are very national. These are all national. These are very important things. These are not things that financial regulators can do on their own. My personal suggestion for the next thing to do with Capital Markets Union will be to go hard on supervision, to really beef up EU-level safety and soundness regulation with the idea that, as with banks, when they are better capitalized and there's less of a fear of a run or a collapse, then the finance can pour in and stimulate this growth economy in a way that will help break out of what are sort of politely billed as national expertise or national circumstances. But really, it's just people being afraid of giving up sovereignty and afraid of what will happen if this money moves more easily throughout the single market. I think it's a risk worth taking. I think the benefits would be huge.
Diego, you had something to add.
Yeah, a quick one. So I've been operating in this VC maturity stage for the last 13 years. And the problem is not the VC itself, is who's going to buy you out. So VC comes in when you are very early, and then you get out as a VC when you are Series Bs or Ds. And if I take our pipeline, again, 200 investments in clean tech, who is taking Norvolt? JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley. Who is taking H2 Green Steel? It's Temasek. Who's taking Vercor? It's Macquarie. So in Europe, we don't have these, who is going to bail you out? It's not only what she said, but it's also who's going to buy you out, because you get in to get out, to pay back your LPs. So, and this is where last year the Commission tried to launch the famous sovereign fund to bridge this gap that in Europe we don't have. The heavy lifting, what I call the heavy lifting, is the 2-3 billion euro investment. And we don't have it in Europe. The sovereign fund was stopped by the member states because they didn't want to become LPs of the sovereign fund. Okay, so let's do a sovereign fund that is purely private, with a bit of anchoring of the AIF. And that will prime the pump. The VCs will come because they have a buyer.
I saw another question just here. If we can get a microphone.
Thank you. One comment and one question. The comment is, we've seen on the slide from the Commission that the administrative burden that's put on European companies is actually okay. It was marked as green, whereas I'm hearing from some of you that it's not okay. So I'm wondering, where does that come from? And my question is, how are we doing on reducing the administrative burden? Because there is a pledge that it's supposed to be reduced by 25%. And where are we there? By how much has the burden been reduced since that pledge was made? Because so far, I can't really see any reduction in my company. For my company, I can actually see more things coming, like the CS3D. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I'm sure, as with all these things, it depends on who you ask. I'm going to ask Audrey, though, because you're probably at the Commission. You know about this pledge and you know about the meaningfulness behind it.
If there's a second question.
No, I just want to confirm over there. The complexity costs from regulation in the EU is tremendously high. If you take for my sector, I'm the CEFIC president now for 3.5 years. We have 14,000 pages for the chemical industry regulation coming out of the Green Deal. I have a whole team at BASF, but I still somehow can afford it, who reads all that stuff and derives what I have to do. But if you are an SME with 300 people, you are dead. And for that reason, I also don't know where this stems from. For my company, it's hundreds of millions of complexity cost we have out of that. And it's actually slowing down everything. It's making it complicated. And the idea is actually, if you have something new to do, you ask yourself where I'm faster, where I have less complexity cost, and then you go with your investment somewhere else, because the world is open. You have good people everywhere. You can actually unfold it everywhere. And so I think it is really a crucial point, and I don't know where your slide or what evidence of your slide came from. I hope Madam President is keeping her promise to take 25% of regulation off, then maybe we get to the point that we have reduced admin costs. I don't know where this comes from, which you showed.
I start with a slide, and I just got a new battery, so now I have a bit extra speaking time in this panel. This is I have shown the slide more often, and this is the indicator which everybody tends to spot, and I'm very often told that this can't be true. We used to look at the World Bank doing business data, but that is no longer produced at the annual level. So we have now used the indicator of the World Economic Forum, where businesses are asked on a scale from 0 to 7, how easy is it to do business in your country? And the EU overall is somewhere around 3.5 on this scale from 0 to 7. That slide that I showed looked at the latest year compared to the previous year and how companies had replied. And there was an improvement in the reply. So this is why it is green, because we have used green to signal whether the trend is up or down. My first slide was comparing levels between the EU and its main competitors. The second one was which of these indicators are improving, which are getting worse at the EU. But indeed, you are certainly not the first person who sees the slide and says, oh, this can't be possible. But it's correct, and it's from the World Economic Forum. Now, on where we are with the 25% exercise, this was announced about a year ago. And of course, some of you may have been around for long enough to remember that there has been one similar exercise 15 years ago with the former Bavarian Prime Minister Edmund Stoiber leading a group which had the goal of reducing administrative burdens by 25%. They took 7 years for that project, and of course the regulatory landscape has changed, and we do have more regulations, including in the area of the Green Deal or human rights, forced labor. So the regulatory burden has increased since the group of Mr. Stoiber. Since March last year, the Commission has put forward 41 regulatory proposals which reduce reporting burdens, either on companies or on member states or citizens. I must say that the area in which I work, single market regulations, most of our reporting obligations are on member states. Have you transposed this directive? What are the results of its implementation? We have put forward some proposals to cut, but of course, we have to find alternative ways of monitoring that things actually make sense and are bringing results on the ground. But these 41 first proposals are just a start. We are doing more evaluations. Every Commission service has been asked to put forward its own plan for rationalization. And at the same time, we are working to measure the existing amount of total reporting burden. So I can't give you a number of what percent in the 25, the 41 proposals were, and how far we have moved towards the 25% cut in reporting burdens. We are certainly not yet there, and this is going to be a work program which will continue into the future. Maybe one last thing, small businesses. The other thing, which is not part of the 25%, but we put forward proposals to help small businesses, and we are also looking at the different derogations and special regimes for small businesses, which eliminate some of these burdens for small businesses. And we are looking at small mid-caps, maybe in some cases as part of that group.
I think with a question in the front row here.
Thank you, Giovanna Fagionato for Politico. It's a question for Andersen, but also to the other panelists. The EIB seems often a cash pot not fully exploited. I would like to know if you agree with the calls for a change in its mandate. The last one pop up on Sunday directly from the EU leaders, but generally, do you see a need for change the rules, or do you think that the mandate is adequate?
Not on. Hello? Yeah. So, no, thank you very much for that question. Well, obviously the mandate is a little bit beyond my, this is obviously the member states. And so, I mean, but I mean, from a, as I tried to express earlier, I think that's, I mean, for whatever that's worth, I think the EIB is quite a unique instrument, right? And I think it's very useful, as I understand, and we've become a lot more useful the last years. Absolutely no discuss, last 15 years, right? But take more risk. Yes, we can ask for more risk and so on, absolutely. And I know there's been discussion of the dual purpose defense spending, for example. This, I mean, who knows where that will go? This I don't know. But I absolutely think it's. I know that we are now taking a lot of our risk mainly based on under the Horizon Europe initiatives, InvestEU with the Commission, so basically guaranteed by the Commission, which means we can that way, for example, for under certain initiatives, thematics, EU thematics, we can go in and support startups, something we could never do before. So we do that in for example, in life sciences, in EDPs, so let's say first demonstration projects in the energy sector, which is very important, obviously. These kind of things, and that has been a big success. So obviously, if we can get more, I can't see that as a bad thing if you get more capital, but I'm not so sure that, again, it's about beyond my pay grade. I'm not so sure that the mandate is not used. I would have thought it's used very well. But again, the bank is evolving, and we have evolved a lot the last 15 years. So the potential is higher with more support, absolutely, and more mandates, for sure.
Diego, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, a quick one. So I will not change the EIB mandate or risk profile, and because the EIB today is the proof point for all the other lenders to crowd in. So whenever the EIB engages, boom, you get everybody behind. It is extremely good for us as industrial objects that require the money. What I require for the EIB is speed. So the same risk profile, but speed. Because the market dynamics, it cannot take 8 months, 9 months to process a file. I mean, if it could be in 3 months, 4 months, then there will be already a huge change with the same risk profile.
Thank you. I think we had a question just here in the middle.
Thank you. My name is Peter Bocek. I'm with CEFIC, talking directly to my president. I would like to mention that Europe is making itself life difficult. That is the impression we have. During the time of Angela Merkel, the former Chancellor of Germany, she always said, we need more Europe. I'm in this town since last century, and I tell you, I was always a little bit worried when she said that, because what I saw was exactly the development that we got presented by the Commission, that the performance indicators are very negative. And we haven't got it right. We haven't got it right. And we have to compare ourselves with our global competitors. And I remember still when I was working with the fertilizer industry and all the plants were mothballed in the US. What then came was the shale gas revolution, and they innovated themselves with investment out of their own crisis. And then they became exporters of energy. Formerly, they were importers. We have to understand as Europe, we also need a game changer now. We cannot continue. And what I see is we do continue as if nothing happened. No matter what crisis, we now envisage a target for 2040, 90% emission reductions. I'm asking myself, is Europe really an island? Can we really turn it around for the globe? We have to be more humble, I believe, and we have to know what can we do with the resources we have, but also with the dependencies we have globally. Thank you.
Well, I think you touch a very big question. I don't want to become philosophical, but I think at the very end, if we want to survive as a region, we have to become more Europe. But if we are at the same moment Europe and all the national governments at the same moment, it's not going to work. But if we want to be relevant, I think we have to speak much more with one voice. And I think whether it's defense now or whether it's foreign policies, I think this is all good reasons to speak with one voice. The mechanism today, we all know that, one country can blackmail the rest to get a compromise for itself. And if that is not going away and we come to a democratic system, there's a voting in the EU, majority beats minority like it is, also among the states, then I think we would be, first of all, much faster. We would have much better answers than taking care about each and everyone, misusing also this. We know the countries who do that. As long as we get stuck in that, I think it's really not working. And I mean, if I look on competitiveness law, that we talk, and I just choose an example here, telecom, that the EU Commission thinks that every country needs 3 offers of mobile services, while the Chinese have 2 companies, then because EU citizens who should have choices, I predict they will not have a choice anymore in any European offer, because they will all be gone. So you have to consolidate it, and then you basically have better one European who's actually top-notch in the world, and you maybe have the chance 1 or 2 Europeans, 2 US offers, and 1 Chinese. Then you have a real choice. So I think in that respect, I'm deeply convinced, and I'm a wholehearted European, we have to become European if we want to have a future.
Have we more questions in the room, or shall we? Yes, one more.
Thank you. Thomas Grotowski from Global Council. We have talked about the IRA and the United States, but we haven't talked about China yet, which I think as such features quite prominently in the report. We just recently had the 2 sessions where China announced a new, quite ambitious growth target, doubling down on its own industrial sector. The question for the room is, how should and can Europe compete with China over the next several years? What is required to be successful?
It's a good question, and it is coming to that area that we haven't really had time to focus on because the panel is quite short. But you know, things like critical raw materials, we saw things like problems with semiconductor supply chains. We've seen European reactions to that with things like the CHIPS Act. But where are we in an international sort of overarching sense with our relationship with China and our dependencies in terms of international supply chains and competitiveness? Rebecca, would you like to start? I see you nodding.
Yeah, this is such an important topic, and I'll be interested to hear what Martin has to say. I would just say that getting too defensive about China is probably not going to have the effect we want. I was looking this morning at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, their scoreboard for innovation. Most of the companies contributing the most to innovation investment growth are American, 8 out of the top 10. One of them is Huawei, and then the last one is Volkswagen. Volkswagen is also one of the companies that is the most outspoken against raising tariffs on Chinese cars. They see the ability of all of these government investments everywhere. I mean, the Chinese investment in electric battery, but also the EU investments in high-tech manufacturing to create synergies, to help them find markets outside the EU and to help EU consumers get cheaper cars, maybe, you know, I'm drawing a link here, but using some of these components in cars made in Europe. And just sort of saying, oh, we're uncomfortable with the level of Chinese government investment, and we're going to shut that out to give our economy time to catch up. I don't think that's going to be a successful strategy.
Well, maybe a good one. I could talk hours about that, and I'm getting pretty enthusiastic about it. But if I take my 10 billion and BASF's 10 billion investment in Guangdong, I would only hope that the EU Commission in Brussels would be half as pragmatic as the Chinese government. I actually get everything to decarbonize. I'm much more successful and faster to decarbonize in China if it comes to renewable or wind energy and whatever. And I mean, we reduce China to coal-fired power plants. If you look at the 125 million people in Guangdong, they have 35% share of renewables. And they have a very ambitious target, so they will beat us. I personally think China's next 5-year plan will have the headline Chinese Green Deal. And they will show us how you can do the Green Deal much more pragmatic than Europe. So I would dress warmly. It reminds me on the ice bath. We will get another one if China comes with the next 5-year plan. So I think looking at the size of that, with all that we don't like over there, and don't get me wrong, it's not all perfect there, but far away from being perfect. By the way, the Chinese people are also not happy with their government. But at the very end, we have to collaborate. And I think actually the Green Deal and the transformation is a fantastic opportunity to collaborate with all the confrontations we have with them. And I don't think we should step away. Human rights and all that stuff, it's very important that we raise it. But in the same moment, that is a size that we also know transformation and protecting the climate is only possible with China and not against China. So I think it is a huge opportunity to also have a collaboration while we're more competing with each other. And I think the 3 legs, which actually the BDI has formulated, is nice. They are partners, they are competitors, and they are also rivals. So this is how it is. But I think we have also to look into cooperation with them.
Klaus Michael, I want to bring you in, because one thing we can't brush under the carpet with Chinese is the workers' rights. So
No,
absolutely, you can be as competitive as you
Martin
want.
forgot the very essential factor. China is not a democracy. It's quite far away.
Reality.
It is a reality for sure, but I'm not sure it's a reality we would like to have here in Europe. So it's a very good example of what we can't compete with. We can't compete with China because we can't give up on democracy, we can't give up on human rights, we can't give up on social dialogue, we can't give up on fundamental rights. So if you're willing to brush all of the preconditions for the freedom that we're having here, of course you can then compare it to China. But I don't think, no, I know. Well, I heard what you said. But I think it's important to bring in a little bit of differences when it comes to this as well. But I'll stop there. I think the whole idea, the rhetoric that's being used now, because there's been a lot of naivety around China. What I see, and I think on our side that we're happy to hear more about this, is the wording de-risking from China rather than decoupling. We don't want decoupling. You don't want decoupling. But de-risking is a very appropriate way forward because there is a lot of risk in China, also for you.
Auti, you wanted to add?
When the pandemic hit, we saw what it means to be so dependent on China, when suddenly supplies ended. And that was the moment when we also started producing more detailed calculations on how many strategic inputs, raw materials we only import from China and nowhere else, which our industry needs. We are much too dependent on imports from China, and this is what the de-risking strategy is about. We have to find alternative suppliers, can be inside the EU, can be in other countries, but we have to de-risk because the risks at the moment are too high. China, we also cooperate with. We have an industry policy dialogue with China. We raise issues there. And as you said, we have regulations, we have laws on values where Europe will refuse to take over some of the models of the Chinese system, which maybe makes them more competitive. At the same time, the slides that I showed show that areas where I think we were very comfortable in having a lead, like high education levels, a very good research system, we have already lost out. And of course, to be more competitive, we have to go back to the basic things like basic education of our labor force and our research, our independence in strategic technologies.
Diego, you had a brief
comment. 3 data points and a couple of messages. Data points in my sector, so clean tech. Today, they have wiped us out in PV, in batteries, they're on the way to do this, in electrolyzers, in wind turbines, you name it. But they have changed over the last 18 months because of 2 facts. Fact number 1, the US closed shop, so you cannot sell any Chinese product. And Europe, imperfect, but launched the NZIA, 40% of the supply is going to be domestic. We have been addressed and approached by all Chinese manufacturers in all those fields, day in, day out. So now we are in a bit of a stronger position that we have ever been to negotiate with. Number 2 data point, as you said, for 30 years we have been the brain, that have been the muscle. I'm afraid that in the next 10 years, they're going to be the brain, we're going to be the muscle. But the muscle here. And to have the muscle here, they will buy our electricity, buy our food, buy our houses. So that's not wrong per se. So my key message is we can't beat them, and so we better talk internationally with them, because the moment is now. We have today the single market, the NZIA, and the US closed shop that will never be stronger to negotiate the right and proper deals.
A final question to all of you, and I know, Martin, you used the analogy of Europe as a company at the beginning. So I'm going to ask each of you, tomorrow morning, you're appointed CEO of Company Europe. What's your first job and what's your first big decision? And you've got maximum 1 minute. There's a clock there, so I'll be able to keep an eye on the timings for it. Outi, I'm going to put you first.
I will go back to what Martin said about the single market as our biggest asset. It is a functioning single market. This is the basis for our competitiveness. My first decision then would be to go back to our EU single market branches in the national capitals and say, look, it's not only about writing rules, it is also about implementing and enforcing them and making sure that the single market works. Because no matter how good the rules are, if they are not put in practice and not enforced, they don't help us. So I would then say we build structures, the branches are organized differently. You have something like an office or a place to bring the single market dimension more visibly into national politics.
Tom, we'll go for you next.
Yeah, so I would actually say the same thing. More integration, the internal market is the biggest feature, the most important thing. We need the economies of scale. That's really the fundament. I mean, and this is, it's working, but it should be working better, right? So that, as I also mentioned, we need to do more there. And I don't know what's blocking it exactly. It's absolutely regulation, but it's also cultural differences and so on. We need to find a way to bridge that and find a consensus here to bring that forward. I think that would be the most important. Maybe working on this common EU identity, right? That's because, I don't know, these days it's certainly in Luxembourg and Brussels, but is it everywhere else? I don't know.
Diego.
So we decided the day after being the reshaping of Europe to launch a $500 billion sovereign fund with private money on the European thesis for the green and industrial transition with a guarantee from the EIB for the first loss of the first 10 billion. 10 billion. So for this, again, we will have the money required to make this happen.
And Rebecca, will you be as bold?
I would create a permanent diversified funding strategy for the European Union. I would make its borrowing capacity permanent. I would separate it from spending decisions. I would say we've got Eurobonds forever and ever. Now we have a safe asset. Now you have a benchmark. You can build your capital market around that. And I would try and depoliticize it from all of the arguments about what that money should be spent on. As long as there's a consistent bond market infrastructure, European borrowing costs will go down, European capital markets will get better, and we can do something with that.
Michael?
Just want to say, I'm the CEO of Europe right now.
Yes.
Good. Company Europe. So first of all, I would fire myself. Secondly, I would then abolish the regulatory burden of 25% because it just reminds me of a man that tried to lose weight and he cut off his leg, which is a very stupid thing to do. I think there are smarter ways to lose weight. But to get a little bit towards the serious issues here, I think you were into something, Martin, that I find very important, and that is the vision and future of things. I believe that it's important to open up the future. The best is yet to come. There is a lot of reason to be optimistic about what's happening in Europe. The glass is not half empty, it's half full, and we're going to make it half full. I would then also try to get rid of the belief of the invisible hand while doing all of this, because I do think that there is a lot of good things ahead of us. And Tom, you bring up I hear a lot of interesting things here, so I would be listening a lot over there.
Martin, in 1 minute. Only.
So if I would be the CEO of Europe, my first thing would be I would look for the most robust person, and maybe Rebecca, it's a woman, she's robust and charming, and I would make her the CS, and I would make her the CSO, and this is not the Chief Sustainable Officer, but that's the Chief Simplification Officer. Because I would really go for an initiative to clean up the house, in very, very fast to demonstrate a few regulations going out. Either you take them off or you really simplify them. Because if I travel out there, and if you go to the US business community, they shake their heads about Europe. And a lot of the leaders over there, which I met, they said, come on, Europe is lost. They said this most probably 5 times already in the past, and we always came back, and it's my optimism. If you go to Asia, they don't understand Europe anymore, and they say there's nothing to learn from Europe anymore. So if you want to set a signal that is fast, I would say exactly this, that we are able to clean up the house, to make ourselves simple, and that we are not dead. We are pretty alive. And we will also, and this is what I think, we will manage the future, and I think we will have a good Europe, but it takes a lot of effort. And so if you want to set a fast example, and I said it's a race against the clock, that would be my measure.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you very much to all of our panelists, to everyone asking questions in the room, to those of you joining us along online and following very closely what we've been discussing, and of course to ERT for organising today. If you want to download that report in full, you can go to ert.eu/BMR 2024. For those here, do join us for a reception, and for those at home, go quickly and get that report downloaded. Have a great day.